Universal Design for Learning for Online Learning, Part 1. Why Universal Design for Learning? There's so much to talk about, including the what of UDL, the how of UDL, and the why of UDL. I want to start with the why. Why should we practice UDL in online learning? I think that question needs to begin with a discussion of averages and how we've come to design courses both in person and online for hypothetical normal students. I would go so far as to suggest that we have idealized the normal student. Well, what do I mean by normal? I mean normal in terms of how they learn, how fast they learn, how they express their learning, and what motivates and sustains them. For example, in an online course, we tend to design for students who learn by our online PowerPoint lectures and through textbooks and other readings. If they don't learn through those channels or learn very well through those channels, chances are they're going to be unsuccessful in the online environment, regardless of how knowledgeable, skilled, or intelligent they are otherwise. We want students who learn the right pace. Too slow is considered problematic. They can't keep up. But it's a surprise to many that being too fast can also be problematic. Such students get bored, want to move ahead, pester the faculty. You know those students. We want students whose pace of learning just so happens to match the pace that we wish to teach. We want students who can take multiple choice tests, write essays, and participate in text-based discussion boards and be effective in expressing themselves in those media. We also want students who are motivated by grades. They want to get A's and B's, maybe to maintain scholarships or to improve their GPA for their future careers. If not, we want students who are going to comply because an authority figure told them to. Of course, we know that there are some students for whom those are not motivating. Such a lack of motivation for grades and compliance is especially common in first-generation college students. Nevertheless, we design as if our students all fit that mold, and we feel as if we're honest, it would be so great if all of our students fit that mold. And you can begin to see why we idealize the average student. If all of our students were average, our job would be so easy. The reality, of course, is that our students are not average. They're variable. Not only are they different from each other, but any given student who appears to be average demonstrates different qualities, different reasons for achieving at an average level. So let's look just at how they learn. It would not be surprising in a class of 20 students to find someone say, "I'm learning content pretty well through textbook reading and the online lectures." But nor would it be surprising to find a student who says, "I feel overwhelmed by the online lecture materials and readings. I need time to really discuss and not in text." It would also not be surprising to find a student who says, "This is boring. I already know this stuff. I wish we were doing something with it." Nevertheless, we haven't designed for the students who are further away from the average. We only designed for that average student. So those who are different are less likely to be successful in this course. So this mantra, this hidden mindset that the more average our students are, the better, has two big problems. Number one, none of our students are truly average. And number two, I don't think we really want them to be. I think that if we really dig down, we'll talk about how we want divergent, creative thinkers who are prepared for jobs that don't exist yet and a world that's always changing. There's a mismatch between the way we educate and the outcomes that we expect. So how can UDL help? This average-focused design simply isn't effective for the variability of students that we can anticipate. So we left with the question, how can UDL help? Or why UDL? Because UDL shifts the focus from the average, where it's traditionally been, into recognizing the predictable variability of our learners and designing for them. This allows all of our students to rise together. Ultimately, this means more students achieve more challenging outcomes than they otherwise would. Let me demonstrate. Imagine that as a faculty member, I'm preparing to teach a course this summer, IT 525, Professional Ethics in Instructional Technology. I start this course with very high expectations for what my students are going to do and challenging outcomes in mind. To help them achieve this, I prepare a series of high-quality lectures in which I'm dynamic and engaging and present important information that's factually accurate and high quality. I also back that up with good reading from top names and top journals in the field. By the time the midterm comes along, I notice that several of my students are struggling. At this point, I really only have a couple of options. I had high expectations and challenging outcomes, but it's not clear that my students are succeeding, at least not all of them. Maybe my expectations and outcomes were too high or too challenging. Well, I can either retrace my steps and recover the content, or I can accept that some of my students simply won't make it. It's important to see that either way, I have lowered my expectations and the outcomes of the course. Let's go back to the beginning of the semester. And again, I'm designing my course with high expectations and challenging outcomes. But this time I think about there's more than one way for students to learn this content, to achieve those outcomes. And I want to be intentional in designing flexibility for how they get there. So in this way, I design flexible pathways to enable my students to achieve those challenging outcomes through different means of representation, different ways that they express themselves, different ways that they engage with the learning material. By the midterm exam, I would expect the students are much more successful, and I'm able to move forward knowing that the significant number of my students are accomplishing the objectives that I intended. In other words, more students are achieving more challenging outcomes. Or, I've designed for variability. In fact, in UDL, we've moved away from the idea of the bell curve and averages altogether, and we simply recognize that there is this predictable spectrum of variability in the human population. In UDL, we've actually been able to tap into neuroscience and education science and social science research to explore how the brain works with regards to learning. And we've mapped out different networks, like the affective network, which deals with what motivates and sustains us through challenge. The recognition network, which deals with how we recognize and conceptualize information. And the strategic network, which deals with how we plan, perform, and express ourselves. These different networks and how they work for different individuals are as unique as our fingerprints. Ultimately, those three brain networks form one brain, and there's tremendous overlap among the three domains. So let's look at what happens in an online lecture class in which there's limited means of engagement, representation, action, and expression. The primary means of communication may be recorded lecture and also assigned readings. These form the ways that content is represented for the most part. We might have discussion boards for students to express themselves, and these are text-based. And in terms of motivation, we're primarily driving with grade-based motivators. That's the default. So let's look at the choices that students can make. They could say, I learn well with lecture, I learn well with readings, or I learn well with both. Three possible combinations. When there's only one primary channel for action and expression and for engagement, there's really no choice. There's just one option. So then we can multiply across and see overall these students have three options, three types of students, we might say, that will learn well in this class. Those who listen well to lecture, participate well in discussion boards, and are motivated by grades. Those who learn well through the readings, participate well in discussion boards, and are motivated by grades. Or those who learn both through lecture and assigned readings, participate well in discussion boards, and are motivated by grades. Ultimately, these are three shades of the same type of student, if you will. And the further away an individual student is from that hypothetical average that we've designed for, the less likely they are to learn and the more painful that process is going to be. In other words, we've designed for the average. Now let's go back and think about those flexible pathways. How might we use multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression in the online class? Let's start with engagement this time. Grade-based motivation is still there, but I might go out of my way to think about how to make the content relevant to my students, especially as I get to know them better. I might also facilitate community interaction through group projects, group discussions, group note-taking, that sort of thing, so the students are not working just for themselves, but also in collaboration and community. I might still have my recorded lectures, though they'll probably be shortened. I'll include high-quality graphic representation and also enable students to undergo peer research as they explore topics together independently. And this is how content will be represented. In terms of action and expression, not just note-taking, but shared note-taking as a practice that many students benefit from, and they can also choose just to take their own notes if they want. We might also have multimedia discussions. So using the discussion board in Canvas or in third-party platforms might allow the students to use video or audio as well as text to express their ideas, and they can choose. Now look at the choices they can make. One student might say, these non-traditional elements are really allowing me to learn in this online class in a way I've never been successful before. Another student might say, well, the traditional things really work for me, and I'm glad that they're still there. Another student might make a different combination, or another. In fact, with those 8 options that we provided, there are 147 possible combinations. That's incredible. You might not believe me, so let's go back to the math. They could choose grade-based motivation, content relevance, community interaction, the first 2, the last 2, the first and third, or all 3. There are 7 combinations that they could make just for engagement. Same thing for representation. And then there's the 3 for how they take action or express themselves. We multiply across and see that there are 147 possible combinations. So why practice UDL in online learning? Because your students aren't average, and you don't want them to be. UDL lets them thrive in their divergence.